This is a review of Unit 3 of AP U.S. Government and Politics entitled Political Parties and Public Opinion. Being able to gauge public opinion is very important for anyone who seeks public office. This is done particularly by looking at polls, the most predominant of which in politics is known as the Gallup poll. Gallup polls were founded by Charles Gallup in 1934, and today are a good way for politicians to craft their campaign messages to know exactly how they're going to reach their voting demographic. It is buyer beware when it comes to consuming polls, as there are a variety of questionnaires and online formats used today that disguise themselves as polls but are not very reliable. Thus, it is important to know the keys to look for in determining if a poll is reliable. The first and most important of which is random sampling, the idea that anyone had the equal probability of being selected to participate in the poll. Also, you want to look at the number of participants. A good poll, if done correctly, can use only about 1,500 to 2,000 members if they are diverse enough. Also, a good poll will tell you what it got wrong by telling you the margin of error. A margin of error that exceeds plus or minus 3 tends to be not the most reliable. Polls in politics can be used for a variety of things, from telling us where consumers are spending their money, giving us insight into the approval ratings of top-ranking politicians. Perhaps the most controversial use of polls comes in the form of an exit poll, in which every 10th voter at a voting precinct is given a more detailed ballot to try to help the media project who the winner of an election may be. It is often criticized for influencing the outcome of elections. To understand public opinion and why people vote the way that they do, we must start with political socialization. Political socialization is the ways that human beings learn or obtain their political views and develop their ideologies over the course of their lifetime. There are many sources that help to socialize us politically as we grow older, the most important of which is the family that we come from. Our parents help mold and shape the types of values and beliefs that we have, and thus shapes our political identity. Some other sources of socialization include the media, our educational system, our peer groups, and our religious beliefs. Those who are in tune with their political beliefs may exhibit a wide variety of political behaviors. Political behaviors are actions that members of civil society take to express their views. Some of these behaviors may be conventional, while others of these behaviors may be considered unconventional. Some example of conventional political behaviors include voting, writing letters to representatives, donating money to a campaign, or hanging up signs or bumper stickers. Some unconventional methods may include protests, rallies, or holding sit-ins as was done during the Civil Rights Movement. Choosing to be active in the political arena really boils down to one's level of political efficacy. Political efficacy is the belief that your participation actually matters in the political process. Of course, those who have strong political efficacy also are inclined to have a strong party identification. This means they know which political party or faction that they associate with, and they consider themselves strong allies to that particular party. Of course, somebody who has a low level of efficacy may have what we call political apathy. This is a disregard for politics, as they don't care much about the process and don't believe that it really matters to be involved. Voting is still the strongest form of political participation in the United States. However, when averaging all types of elections in this country, only about 1/2 of our electorate votes. The electorate, of course, are those who are eligible to vote in a particular society. Demographically, there are certain groups of people who are more likely to vote versus those who are not as likely to vote. In the likely to vote category includes people who are 30 and older, women, government workers, middle to upper income Americans, people with some college education or more, and those who feel a strong party identification. In the unlikely to vote category includes groups such as those who are younger voters, ethnic minorities, lower to middle lower income Americans, high school educated Americans or lower than that, or those who feel low efficacy or are apathetic. Being politically socialized throughout our lives helps us to identify our political ideology. Our ideology is the set of beliefs that we hold that help us identify where we fit on the political spectrum. The political spectrum, pictured below, gives us an idea of where most people think in terms of their overall political outlook. In the United States, most people consider themselves moderate or centrist. However, the majority either lean one way to the left or to the right, with ideologies known as both liberal or left-leaning or conservative right-leaning. Liberal philosophies include some of the following. Liberals tend to be pro-choice, in favor of gun control, pro-labor, they favor increased social spending and entitlement programs, they tend to favor affirmative action, and support same-sex marriage. On the conservative side, conservatives tend to be more pro-life, they tend to favor gun ownership, increase military spending, they tend to stand up more for states' rights and less federal government, they tend to believe more in traditional Christian values, and they tend to favor more laissez-faire capitalistic economic policies. Our political ideology does help steer us in the direction of what political party we align ourselves with the most. It is important to remember, however, that the U.S. Constitution makes no mention of political parties, and in fact, George Washington, our first president, warned us about the formation of political parties and the divides that it may cause. In the United States, political parties are actually organized quite the opposite of major corporations, which are usually top-down. Political parties are actually ground up in the United States. This means that there are very largely independent levels of parties at the national, state, and local levels. The formation of political parties has served several purposes for us, the first of which is to help us build coalitions of people who have similar interests, the second of which is to mobilize voters and encourage them to go out and vote, the third of which is to influence policy, as political parties tend to work together to try to get policies passed that are consistent with their beliefs. And finally, political parties do serve as linkage institutions. In politics, a linkage institution is any group or institution that links the voters to the policymakers. The United States is regarded as a two-party or bipartisan system. What this means is that even though the United States has many political parties, its system is set up in such a way that really only two major parties are able to consistently compete. The two most recognizable and dominant parties in the United States today are the Democrats and the Republicans, or GOP, standing for Grand Old Party. The Democrats tend to be more left-wing or liberal base, while the Republicans tend to be a more right-winged or conservative party. It is, however, important to remember that not all Republicans are necessarily truly conservative, nor are all Democrats necessarily full left-wing liberals. There are particular demographics of voters that each party tends to count on when it comes election time. Statistically, the following groups are more likely to vote Democrat. They include women, younger voters, ethnic minorities, Jewish voters, and urban residents. The Republican Party tends to rely on the following voters as part of their demographic: more college-educated, older voters, those who are more devout evangelical Christians, small and large business owners, and military or war veterans. It is important to understand that over the course of centuries, the traditional blocks of voters that have made up a particular party has shifted. We have terms for those types of shifts. One is known as party realignment, and the other is known as party dealignment. It is first important to understand that party realignments are very rare occurrences. A party realignment is when the traditional voting patterns of a particular group change, and the balance of power shifts from one party to the other. This usually comes about because of a critical election that takes place around a major event or a series of events. The most profound party realignment in the United States was during the 1930s when FDR's New Deal coalition kicked in. Many traditional Republican voters switched to the Democratic Party due to the Great Depression. Party de-alignment is when voters begin to turn away from their political party and choose not to replace it by joining another party. This has happened a lot in recent decades as we've seen an influx of people turning to independence. In recent decades, the two mainstream parties, particularly in the United States Congress, have become more and more polarized. Party polarization is the term we use to describe how the two parties have grown further and further apart in their ideologies. This polarization has created several effects, the most profound of which being policy gridlock, as the two parties seem less and less willing to compromise and find common ground for their constituencies. It's also encouraged the president and the judicial system to take more unilateral action since they can't rely on Congress to get things passed. It's also led to extremely low public approval ratings when it comes to their members of Congress. So, what has caused such deep polarization in recent years? There are three main reasons that we believe polarization has set in so badly. One is that the districts have been gerrymandered in such a way that districts today are either very conservative or very liberal, and thus those running to represent those districts have to try to appeal to those very liberal or very conservative voters. The second reason is the outburst of 24/7 cable narrowcast news reporting that tends to portray the other party as the villain. And finally, the competition for campaign financing has led these politicians to have to move to the extremes in order to get their campaign financed. It is important to remember that while Republicans and Democrats tend to dominate the political arena, that there are several third parties in the United States, the most predominant of which is the Libertarian Party. There are several purposes for having third parties. one of which is that they offer alternatives to voters who are dissatisfied with the two main parties. They also tend to broaden the opportunity for debate by bringing up issues that may otherwise be avoided. This tends to force the main candidates to take a less ambiguous position on the issues and have to dive in with more specific answers. While third-party candidates certainly do offer us more democratic opportunities, they face major obstacles to be able to win political offices, the first of which applies to third-party candidates who wish to run for the presidency. Since it is a winner-take-all system, the candidate who receives the most votes in any particular state receives the entire number of electoral votes for that state. This often excludes third-party members. For those running for Congress, they have to deal with the single-member plurality system in which each constituency is only allowed to send one member to Congress. That person solely has to have the highest percentage of votes, not even half. That also tends to work against third-party candidates who would benefit more from a more proportional-based system in which seats were allocated according to the percentage of the vote that that party received. The next is limited ballot access, as not every candidate is able to get their name printed on the ballot in each state. Limited media access also works against third-party candidates, as they must fit into the 15% rule, in which they must show that they are getting at least 15% of the popular vote in national polls to have any opportunity to participate in televised debates. And finally, they tend to receive a lot less campaign financing, as major PACs and interest groups doubt their ability to be able to pull off a victory. True to the federal system of government that our founding fathers established, since voting is not specifically mentioned in the U.S. Constitution, voter registration and the conducting of elections is a reserved state power. This means states can set their own requirements for registering to vote and can establish where voting precincts will be set up at. They of course do still have to adhere to some federal guidelines, including the Voting Rights Act and the 24th Amendment, which abolished poll taxes as a requirement to vote. With voter registration and voter turnout still very low across the United States, both the federal government and the individual states have taken some measures to try to get registration and turnout up. The first of which, taken by the federal government, was the passage of the Motor Voter Act in 1993, which made it possible for 16-year-olds to register to vote at the same time that they got their driver's license. Some states also put in place same-day registration, as people could show up, register, and vote on the exact same day. And some states have put early voting in place, where those who can't make it out on the traditional voting Tuesdays are able to come out earlier and have their vote cast. Keeping in the tradition of making sure that every American's vote is counted, there are things known as absentee ballots and provisional ballots. An absentee ballot is a ballot that is casted by a voter who will be unable to attend their official polling station on Election Day. This could be for the reason of physical mental disability, service in the military overseas, or limited means of transportation. Provisional ballots are ballots that are casted by voters who do show up on Election Day, but are not able to verify their identification. They cast their vote, and the vote is later counted once the person's identity can be verified. The media has taken on a very important role in the political arena. The media, much like political parties, is considered a linkage institution because it again connects us to our policymakers. Over the last century, the media has become almost like a fourth branch of government, as it's had the ability to help set the policy agenda. By policy agenda, we mean the issues that government figures, particularly members of Congress, are going to choose to focus on the most and make a priority in the policy-making process. Media has evolved significantly over the last couple of decades. At the beginning of the 20th century, print media was at an all-time high, with high numbers of newspaper subscriptions and magazines. That, of course, has died off in recent years. Radio became the hot wave of the 20s and 30s, and by the 1950s, most Americans had televisions in their home. Television is still the largest political media format. The Internet has also changed the way that people are able to research politics, though the Internet is not used as much for political reasons as one would hope. Early American presidents enjoyed a cozy relationship with the U.S. media. Take, for example, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who the media never reported was confined to a wheelchair as an effect of polio, and President John F. Kennedy, whose extramarital affairs were not really revealed to the public until far after his untimely death. The Vietnam War in the 1960s and coverage of Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal in the 1970s completely changed the way that the media portrayed the U.S. president and in turn affected the way that the public look at their executive. What Americans were left with was a high level of distrust in their government. This sparked by a new wave of journalism known as investigative journalism, in which the media would use a tactic of pitting the reporter against the politician. It was an antagonistic and combative method, which is designed to try to uncover scandal and get high ratings. These new strategies by the American media has created what we now call a very candidate-centered election process, in which the media focuses far more on the image of the individual than his or her political ideas. This, of course, has led to a large spike in campaign spending, as candidates try to use large amounts of money to mold their public image through television and the internet. This type of candidate-centered coverage has led to a different breed of journalism when it comes to election time. It is now called horse race journalism because the media tends to focus only on the day-to-day campaign activities and where the two candidates are traveling, as well as who is ahead in the polls each time. This type of coverage makes it more about a competition and less about the issues, which tends to be good for the ratings, but not so good for political knowledge. The outburst of cable television combined with the polarization of the parties today has led many Americans to turn off broadcast news networks like ABC, NBC, and CBS and turn on to cable news channels like Fox News, MSNBC, and Comedy Central, in which Americans are able to get their news delivered from an editorial perspective. These news programs actually deliver the news through a very politically biased forum in which liberals or conservatives are able to get the news through their own point of view. Depending on who you're discussing the media with, you may get three very distinct views of the media's role in American politics today. Those three views are the gatekeeper, the scorekeeper, and the watchdog. Some Americans view the media as a gatekeeper, meaning they believe that they decide what issues they're going to cover and how long they're going to cover them. Some view them as the scorekeeper, meaning that they keep track of who's winning in the polls, and they have the ability to make or hurt someone's reputation. Finally, some view the media as a watchdog, investigating any political activities that are going on and exposing corruptions or scandals that could break out. I hope that you found this review of Unit 3 of AP U.S. Government and Politics, Political Parties and Public Opinion to be helpful for you. Good luck on the AP exam in May.